Good? We are live. Awesome. All right. We're going to get started. Thank you all for waiting around and just for being here on a Saturday morning. We really appreciate it. I'm going to send it over to Pablo, Juan Pablo, to give us a little introduction.
Itayapule mautepele network met nawazo. I want to greet you in the language of my people to what we call Somisek, the land that is now known as Texas, has had several names over the centuries, and ask you to keep your feet grounded and take in some of the air, breathe in, breathe out. That's the first lesson that we all live in life or learn in life is to breathe. First you take and then you give back. So close your eyes, feel your feet beneath the ground, breathe in, and then breathe out. As you do this, I want you to remember all the ancestors that lived here, the struggles that we have had over the years and continue to have now, because it's all connected. We're all connected. In one way or another, we're all family. And there's only one earth beneath our feet. We can fight over it as much as we want to. We can disagree about things, but in the end, we're all in this together. I just want to say that much.
Thank you, Pablo, Juan Pablo. And I'm going to pass it over now to Melissa, who will talk a little bit about where we are today.
Hi, welcome everybody to the Museum of South Texas History. I'm Melissa Benny, I'm the archivist here. And we just want to welcome you. This is Preservation Week. We're on the tail end of it. Preservation Week was started by the Library of Congress, and it's just I would like to call it a celebration of maintaining our history by being mindful of it and how it needs to be taken care of and preserved for our next generations. As an archivist, they tell you in school that your job is to keep something whole and well for 100 years, and then after that, it's the next person's problem, right? So you do your best practices until you can pass it on to the next person. And so we just want to welcome you. We're all going to talk about some sort of preservation, and thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you. And I'm just going to give a little bit of background about who I am and where I come from. My name is C. Diaz. I'm one of the co-founders of ENTRE Film Center. We are a regional archive and a film center dedicated to preserving, creating, and exhibiting home movies, oral histories, other sorts of alternative cinematic expression in our organization. We host workshops and screenings for the community, free to low cost, and we also have an archive that focuses on home movies and oral histories, as I've mentioned. And today we're super excited to be a part of the museum's Preservation Week celebration because we love to do archival things. And everyone on this panel, who I will introduce in just a second, is doing some incredible preservation efforts across the valley, and that's what we're highlighting today, and also hopefully inspiring you all to get involved in your own ways or to get involved with these projects. And yeah, so like that. So you learned a little bit about myself. I'm going to go to my left. This is Gabriel Sanchez. Gabriel has spent the last several years researching, documenting, sharing, and writing about the LGBTQIA history of the Rio Grande Valley. Gabriel has presented at museums and colleges on this topic and curates an annual exhibit highlighting local queer and trans history and culture, as well as a digital collection on Instagram called Pansy Pachanga. Gabriel's also involved with multiple efforts to advocate for the LGBTQIA+ community in the Rio Grande Valley, including STEP, Gen Text, and the RGB Trans Closet. Thank you for being here, Gabriel. Melissa, yes, aplauso, aplauso. Melissa Peña, an Edinburgh, Texas native, graduated from the University of Texas Pan American with a Bachelor of Arts in History and minor in Anthropology. During her internship at the Museum of South Texas History, she volunteered in the Margaret H. McCallum Memorial Archives, which led to her earning a master's degree in archival studies from Clayton State University. Since 2015, Melissa has worked in various positions at MOSTHistory, reinforcing the importance of preserving and presenting history. Currently, she is working toward a better accessibility for community preservation. Welcome, Melissa. Next, we have Monica A. Sosa, a left-handed segunda loving domestica designer and nesting aficionado. She is an arts administrator by profession and community organizer in Fronteriza de Corazón. Monica currently serves as the Boca Chica Corazón Grande project curatorial manager at ENTRE and as the board administrator for the Centro por la Justicia Southwest Public Workers Union. Previously, she led cultural initiatives as the program manager of the Leadership Institutes at the National Association of Latino Arts and Cultures, where she co-led programming for hundreds of Latinx and cultural leaders and visionaries. Welcome, Monica. Next, we have Juan Pablo Mancias, who was born in Lubbock, Texas in 1984. Juan Pablo Mancias is a documentarian and photographer preserving indigenous heritage. They hold degrees in philosophy and music from Texas Tech University. With 15 years of education and a diverse artistic background, they now serve as tribal administrator for the Carrizo Come Crudo tribe, advocating for the indigenous rights and environmental justice. Welcome, Juan Pablo. And we have Nansi Guevara, a rasquache artist, illustrator, and author based in Brownsville, Texas. Originally from Laredo, Texas, she holds a bachelor's in fine arts and design from the University of Texas at Austin and a master's in education from Harvard University. She is currently focused on narrative change and cultural organizing to create radical spaces of resistance and creative economies centered on community cultural wealth and solidarity. She runs her own freelance illustration for education practice, Corazón Contento, based out of Brownsville, Texas. Nansi awarded residencies, fellowships, and grants from the NEA, Artplace America, A Blade of Grass, NALAC, SFAI, and currently a Constellations Fellow at the Center for Cultural Power. Welcome, Nansi. And today's panel is more of a roundtable discussion. So feel free, panelists, to jump in whenever you feel called to say something that's coming up. And yeah, more of a conversation rather than a question and answer sort of situation. What we're focusing on today is timelines. This panel is called Timelines from the Future, Preservation Efforts Across the Rio Grande Valley. And what that means is we are all working in different capacities to create the world we want to live in through archival pursuits and preservation efforts. And one of the topics I really wanted to kick off this conversation with is the idea of power and the thought about power and who has it, who gets to choose what is considered an archival material and what gets to be put in the historical record. So I wanted to start with that and opening that up in power in the archives and where that power is what it holds for our future. Is there anyone that wants to kind of pop in, or I can unpower an authority?
I think I can
Yeah, I think starting from an institutional lens is probably good.
So is this good? Am I good? Okay. So I work here at the archive at the Museum of South Texas History, and there's something that we had noticed a couple years back is that our archive tells a singular voice, and they always say the history is told by the person who wins, right? And so we were telling the history of those who started this establishment, and it's now my job to tell a broader story and take in more information. The problem is people don't feel like their information is important, and that's our number one. That's the thing that I have to talk to people about the most. It's like, you are important. Yeah, you didn't run for mayor, or you weren't the president, but you lived here and you worked here and you raised your family here and you did things here. You attended parades and you went to the grocery store, and you can tell us more of what this area looked like at that point in time. But unless I go out and personally ask people for things, a lot of times people don't bring them into us because they don't feel like their stories are important enough. And then we're stuck telling the same exact story of the people who had the money to start the archive to begin with, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
So in order for us to tell not just the wealthy donor story, we need to make sure that everybody's story is archived. Now, we don't always have space for that. So we ask you to archive your own things, and then let us know what you have, and then maybe we can borrow it to tell that story. But Yeah, we don't want just the people who have done major work. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. I think as an organization that is an archive as well, ENTRE, we are always talking about home movies and how home movies contribute to the collective memory and our collective history. And home movies are overlooked in a lot of archives because they are first-person accounts. They're not really considered historical like fact points. You know, we're thinking about history as a objective view, and home movies are more of a subjective approach to a way of life, a culture, a place of living. But we find that the reason people of color have been left out of archives is because our stories, and maybe this internalized narrative of maybe my stuff isn't good enough, or like I'm not anyone, why would you want my birthday party from 1995? You know, like yes, we want that birthday party from 1995. We want to see what Gorilla Georges looked like during then, you know. And seeing the different types of landscapes that have changed over time is important to understand the complexities and nuances of the region that we're in, right? So I think that's very, very true, how it's important for institutions like the Museum of South Texas History to advocate for personal archives and those collections within it. Because I think something that came up during our initial like panel conversation, maybe people can jump in on this, is about identity and how learning about ourselves through our past is so important in understanding where we want to go and what kind of worlds we want to build, right? I don't know if anyone wants to hop in on that.
I kind of want to like connect the two.
Yeah.
So for me growing up, and this may be the same for a lot of people in this room, is being able to see yourself in the education that you're getting has always been a struggle. I know as a kid, I was being taught my history at home, but then when I'd get to, junior high, history, like there was this reference to the natives in Texas being, cannibalistic, and like this idea that like we forget how savage these groups were, and like it's almost a justification for years of genocide and cultural erasure. So that's something that, with that mindset of like, maybe I'm not enough, it's almost like you're ashamed or embarrassed to acknowledge your identity. But within my family, one thing that we have done, speaking about like home videos and like oral histories, for example, those are really important, especially in a space that doesn't know this idea of telling stories for the sake of power, or the sake of subduing somebody else's place in society, to set up a hierarchy or importance of a perspective. Because I was raised on a lot of different traditions, and it was a part of my family's attempt to reclaim land here. But not only land, not land to be landowners and to say this is ours, but to reclaim our identity, because I don't personally acknowledge national identities as a lot of people do. Like, some of my family members are like, we're Mexican, and some of our families like, well, we're born in the US. I mean, like, but we're family ultimately. And we have those familial ties. We have extended family, and that's how our ancestors did it. We have clans, we have traditions, and we pass those things down through our stories. And with that said, like I was always told like stories about like the mission systems that had been passed down to our family, about the atrocities that were done to our people if we wanted to escape the missions. And there was this story about India Pata Rajada, like the cut foot, right? They would cut our Achilles tendons if we tried to escape, so we couldn't run again from the missions. And me growing up, like again, with the school system and feeling that shame and not feeling like my identity was enough, I went to college. I started to learn a little bit. I started to, reconnect. But I had been raised in it. And so for me, it was like a journey of like self-acceptance, right? Not just hearing the history through my family, but also accepting myself. And it wasn't until Texas Parks and Wildlife, because my dad has done a lot of work through over the years, and part of his work has been, because my dad knows people throughout the nation in the indigenous community, was repatriating artifacts that were found here in Texas, primarily to tribes that weren't in this area. So Texas Parks and Wildlife called my dad and said, hey, look, we're here at Lake Allen Henry, the water level has lowered, there are cave paintings on the walls, and we were told to call you. He couldn't make it, so just like today, I showed up for him, and I showed up with my camera, and they took me out on a boat, and we took pictures, and one of them stuck out to me because it was a story of the missions, and there's a picture of a priest. You can tell it's a priest, it's a black figure with a cross on his chest, with a sword cutting the Achilles tendons of Native people. So for me, that was like an aha moment, is that there's something to be said about these oral histories, that a genuine honesty, like, and a truth that can't be denied, like, because that's your truth, that's your perspective, and here it is, not only being passed down with love, through family members, but here it is in the land, and that's one thing that I've learned, is that our connection to the earth is just as powerful as these archives that are set up. These archives, in a lot of ways, are set up it's almost like a patents of nobility, to give them validation and to give the oppressor a sense of power. It's more authority than it is power. It's an illusion, what came first, the geographical location or the map, right? Yeah. And that map is a strength idea of the Western world, like, here it is written down, like, I'm a scientist, but like, does that map include, like, the histories of the people who walked it, the people who interacted with that land and their presence on it?
Yeah, no, I think education is a big thing that comes through in all these conversations, is what are we learning in our school systems, and how, these, education is a form, I think, of repair, and repairing, like, these traumas within us, and maybe any sort of self identities that maybe we didn't want to face or accept, and then being able to learn about them through tradition, through oral history, and then seeing them actually connected in the physical plane, But yeah, I think beautifully said. And does anyone have a thought about? I think Nancy Nuestra Delta is Nancy's project Nuestra Delta is definitely, like, encompassing all of this. And if you don't know about it, I'm sure she'll tell you about it.
Hello, everyone. So yeah, this is very, like, internal and very personal work. I started a project a few years ago called Nuestra Delta Mágica, and it was after seeing what the liquefied natural gas industry wants to build, essentially pipelines and a refinery, thank you. A refinery, and then just like the settlement and colonization of SpaceX in Boca Chica Beach, just observing that, and then working alongside the tribe, and Juan and Pablo and Becca, and they're really leading on the forefront of climate justice in Brownsville. It's hard to observe all that. It's hard to observe just a place kind of being taken over by industry, and these, like, very complacent, ignorant, I would say stupid, like, city officials, right, are just, like, giving them the okay. And so that prompted me to, like, dig deeper into, like, just answering why. And so I started, I think this is a long story, but, like, I don't know, I don't want to take up a lot of
Tell us your
Okay,
story.
You're fine. Okay.
This is about archives and documenting our stories.
I know. So I started being interested in this narrative of there's nothing here, because I would hear not only city officials say that, but these companies also. Oh, there's nothing there, like we're gonna bring jobs, or there's nothing there, we're gonna bring this like cool like space testing site. And so I reflected on that narrative because I had heard it since I was young, because I grew up in Laredo, and Laredo is not like super different than here, although I know y'all make a distinction.
There are some differences,
It's similar but unique.
but they're the other 956, and we love Laredo.
It's 956, baby.
Yeah, we're all 956. You're right. And so I had grown up with that drilled into my head, and all I wanted to do when I turned 18 was leave Laredo, right? And the same thing here, like we internalize that narrative, and it really benefits these companies, these industries, like neocolonialism, right? Because then it's like, even I hear people when people talk sometimes, a lot of us are against these companies, but like just listening to folks be like, oh, well, we'll finally have something cool, you know what I mean? And like, I think a lot of this project, Nuestra Alta Mágica, is trying to like dismantle these ideas, because and also what Pablo was saying, like learn our own history, right? Because part of them saying there's nothing here is that so that we don't learn history of this place and what the abundance that we have here. And so I'm hoping that this project, prompts people. So we have a website now with history, so it's a good introduction if folks don't know about the history of South Texas or the Rio Grande Valley.
There we go.
NuestraDeltaMagica.com. But another thing that I want to work to prompt in folks, starting with myself, because it's internal work, and that it, is that we have such an ecological abundance here with the Rio Grande Delta, and the many plant and animal species, lomas, like rare, also endangered species, like this whole area, like we need to sustain this area in order to survive and to thrive. And so like I want folks to understand that there's a lot of, we have a lot of beauty here, and like things that like I feel I get emotional when, for example, because we were going back to like leaving Laredo, it's like I left and it was good in one sense, but it also, I felt like I then didn't acknowledge the power of like my culture or my cultural wealth, right? Like I had to leave like my abuelita, and my abuelita now is like 94, and she doesn't remember a lot of things. And so it's like that erasure and that stolen culture is like, it's painful, And so when I learn here, like in El Valle, like El Valle has been kind of a healing place for me too, because I was away from the border for like 10 years and then I came back. But I'll end with this point that every time I learn about, for example, the dunes or the lomas or the mycelium, right, the Moctezuma cypress trees, I'm like, wow, I'm learning and I'm gaining back the culture that was like stolen from me, like, and kept from me. And like, that makes me angry. But also I'm like, I feel like I'm connecting more And we should know about these things because these things are so magical. Those trees are magical. We have like a 900 plus old Montezuma tree. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess to follow up on that, the project I'm currently leading with ENTRE is Boca Chica, Corazón Grande, and it is a community archival project that really focuses on documenting Boca Chica Beach, right? And as Nancy and Pablo both mentioned, we have this continuous interest in this land because there's strategy and there's a lot of richness here. There's so many ecosystems and the fact that it is part land and part water. And unfortunately, I think what I've noticed is this narrative of there's nothing here, you have to leave in order to get what you need or what you want, and don't look back, right? And so my story is a little different. I had a very, I was blessed with an intervention of my sister's husband was stationed in Hawaii, and I went over there and I lived there when I was 15. I told my mom I wasn't coming back. But you know, it's this interesting thing because I went to school there, right? And whenever anyone asked, where are you from? I'd be like, Brownsville, you know? And they're like, tell me more about Brownsville, you know, as this young person that has continuously been drilled with this idea by my educators, by my caregivers, and not necessarily my mom or my family, but just the people that were around me all the time, right? And then it created this sense of, I don't know who I am. I don't see myself reflected in the histories that are continuously being told to me. So I feel like a complete outsider and I don't see the value in myself. But then hearing this like interest in the valley from people who are in Hawaii, right? So you think of Hawaii and it's like this paradise and all this like way that it's been kind of like sold to us, right? And there's just like so much interest in the fact that it is part land, part water. You're on the border, you have all this culture, this transient like way of living. And then, yeah, there's a lot of really painful parts of this because violence has been so present for so long here, either through the militarization of the border, through environmental racism, through internalized racism, which is a huge thing here. And I think in that way, it's important for us to challenge those narratives because for me, I just embodied that because I saw my mom embody that because she was taught that she needed to assimilate. She was taught that she needed to get rid of everything that was her being because it wasn't good enough. And even though she didn't tell me that, she never told me, you have to leave. Like it was just something that we embodied and that we took on. And so with that, just always kind of trying to find that journey of self, right? Because I feel like we have been severed, not just from ourselves, but from this land and the beauty that exists in both of those areas. And so memory work is painful. It requires that you look back at all the pieces that come before us, whether it's our lived experience or previous generations. But it also teaches us a lot. And I think it really opens up avenues for celebration and joy, which is kind of the core of Boca Chica, Corazón Grande, right? Like that concept started because, again, my family, we're working class. My mom still works and she's 78, so the only place that I think we felt like we could always go to was Boca Chica Beach because it was free, it was abundant in beauty, it was like no one was judging you, and like it was cool to see that. And then I became detached to it because body dysmorphia and like body images. I was like, I don't want to go to the beach. I'm a beach goth. But still having that value, and I think it really, I had always wanted to do this personal project for me and my family, but then back in 2013, 2014, hearing about how politicians were like, SpaceX, come here. And then eventually they did because they passed a bill, and I can't remember what it is at this moment, but granting complete access and permission to SpaceX to close down for any space activities, the most broad ability to say like, well, today's a space activity.
And it bypassed the Open Beaches Act,
the Open
right?
Beaches Act. So, it's definitely a threat against our rights and what we have here and what we continue to cherish. And then the fact that we had the first generation or the first round of SpaceXers calling themselves mutters. This is actually something that you can find in the Jacobin magazine. but mudders was spelled Mudders. And they said that when they got here, it's kind of like a reference to mother, because they were the mother, but there also was a sense of there's only mud here. So they're mudders. And then hearing that, I was like, oh, hell no. But seriously, like, how can you say that there's nothing here when you just literally stand and once you reach the ocean, like Nancy said, there's like all these various like ways of life and species and cuties that are just like, what is this alien life?
Yeah.
And so much to explore. And for this entity to come in and say that it is here to advance humanity is BS. Because the only thing that they are advancing is themselves, and it's continued racism, environmental racism. And so our way of combating this, although, you know, we can't take everything down all at once, I think we feel really empowered in getting to do this internal work with ourselves and with our collective. So documenting those memories, yes, the painful ones, the things that we don't want to repeat themselves, but also holding on to that joy of freedom, of families coming together, of this ability to knowing that we can connect with nature and knowing that we've been here. We've always been here. So for someone like SpaceX to say, nothing's here, is like, you know what, we're gonna do this and we're gonna make it. It's something that we had to do ourselves because we went to the Brownsville Historical Association, and I'll end with this, but they only had a total of about 5 for record.
There's 3 photographs.
And one video,
And
right?
one video on the Texas Archive of the Moving Image. So Monica came to ENTRE and presented this project to me in 2021, and she was just talking about it. And so I did some research to see what kind of archives existed of Boca Chica Beach in the valley, and found that there were 3 photographs at the Brownsville Historical Association and 1 home movie from the 60s on the Texas Archive of the Moving Images database.
Yeah.
And
And
that's
none of
when
them
I was just like,
included-
oh my God, we have to do this project. There's no documentation of this beach. And that is why people are saying there's nothing there.
Yep.
Because there's no documentation of it in our institutions. And so as a community stewarded archive, this was the perfect entry point to be like, okay, let's see how this works, you know? And thinking about photographs and collections, working with community, I wanted to open it up to Gabriel and Pansy Pachanga and your project, and seeing how those photographs and that process of like finding all these people for the past like what, 10 years already?
6, I think
6?
years.
It feels like it's been a very long
A
time.
long time, yeah. Yeah, so I think in speaking about the theme of power, or the topic of power, I think it's been a really interesting and empowering experience to document the story, or to try to piece together the story of a community that in many ways has existed in reaction to power dynamics. We've talked a lot about how power dynamics dictate what is deemed worthy of preservation and what gets to go into an archive, but also, and especially in the past, but even into the present day, and we're seeing this with a lot of the legislation that we're seeing targeting our community specifically, people in power and systems in power often get to dictate who gets to exist in public. And so we're really documenting a community that in many ways had to hide in order to survive, and that by its very nature was only able to thrive because it stayed to some degree or another underground. And so it's been interesting to try to document a community that in many ways had to hide parts of who they were, either through their daily life or through, you know, some people who never got to live fully as themselves, right? And so how do you document a community that in many ways had to hide in order to exist? And so we've lost so many people because systems in power have erased those stories. We've lost so many stories either through people who stayed in the closet their entire lives and never shared their stories with their loved ones or their family members, people who left the valley and never came back because it was so difficult for them to exist as their authentic selves here, people who we lost to homophobic or transphobic violence, or to the AIDS crisis, which in a way was a form of systemic violence. Hundreds or thousands of stories have been erased and lost to us for that reason. And so the people who are here today to tell the stories of those communities, or the archival material that those communities left behind, are so important for that reason, because it's only unfortunately the tip of an iceberg, the tip of the iceberg of stories that may never be documented or told. But I think we also, I've had to have a lot of conversations with queer and trans elders, kind of convincing them that their story is worth documenting, because for so long they were taught that that part of their life was something to be ashamed of, or that it had no value. It was something that embarrassed their families. So people who are leaders in the community who help create spaces for other members of the community to exist in and thrive and find other people like themselves didn't necessarily see the value in what they were doing and didn't necessarily see why it was worthy of being preserved. You know, I've talked to people who said, yeah, I had all my pictures of myself in drag, but I threw them all out because, you know, I didn't see the point in keeping them. I was kind of embarrassed looking back at them. And so I think that's one of the reasons why this history is so important to document, because we're still dealing with systems of power that don't want us to exist, that are threatened when we exist in public or when we exist as our full authentic selves. And so looking at how our community survived and resisted and found ways to thrive, right, despite people actively trying to erase them, I think gives us kind of a roadmap for how we can continue to resist that kind of oppression into the future. And I think there's a lot of power, you know, I think it's really a story of power. There's a lot of power in taking a picture of yourself when people tell you you don't have a right to exist. There's power in coming out and declaring yourself as who you are. There's power in putting on makeup and a wig when you've been made fun of for being so feminine your entire life. There's a lot of power in that, and I personally have felt like I feel like I am much more empowered and able to exist as myself because of that. And that's a gift that I want to give to other people. And I think that's one of the reasons why this story is so important. And the last thing I'll say before we move on to the next question is, you know, when I was thinking about this and hearing other people talk, I thought about a obituary that I found for a trans man who was a drag king performer starting in the 1970s and into the 80s and 90s, and he mentored other drag kings, and he was an inspiration to a lot of trans men and transmasculine individuals who came out at that time. And the obituary was written by his family, and it mentions nothing about his decades as a performer. It mentions nothing about the community he helped to foster, and it doesn't refer to him by his chosen name and his pronouns. And so I think when the people who are in power get to tell the story, whether it's on a large scale like in a museum or on a small scale like in an obituary in the local paper, so much gets left out because it makes the people in power uncomfortable. And so I think there's still a lot of power in telling these stories. When I've presented in the past, people have gotten upset and they've said, well, how can you say something about the McAllen? You know, I've talked about the McAllen Police Department enacting transphobic violence against people outside of gay bars here. And that's just a reality, whether it makes people uncomfortable or not. And people have said, well, how can you say that about the city of McAllen? And someone complained to the McAllen Public Library because I was saying that. And so I think when we tell these stories, it still makes people in power uncomfortable. And I think that that's why this work is so vital.
Because it shows that we have a lot of power.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
And I just want to
Yeah,
speak
go
on that
for it.
really quickly. And so a lot of times people will come in wanting to do research on things, and I don't have it. I don't have anything for them to look at or see or whatever. And what I have to tell them is, if you don't give it to us, we don't have it. So much of my job is preserving and processing collections, processing things, that I don't have a lot of time to go out into the community, though I do go out into the community. But like you said, if you've been made ashamed of something and you don't want to share it with your family, you're not going to come to the archive and give it to us. So I always tell people, if you have it, give it to us. I will take almost anything because it is so important to keep this history. I have said from the beginning of my career is that in a lot of cultures, oral histories are what they have. They don't have anyone sitting down typing up their history. Nobody's published a book on this family or that family. A lot of families have those things, you know, whatever. But oral histories are so important, and they are history. They are just as important as a written history, as far as I'm concerned, because that's how many families pass down their stories, their history to the next generation. Sit down, listen to your elders, record it. Record your elders talking. Bring some cafecito, bring some bundles, sit down and listen to them. Spend that time. Pick a day of a week, sit down with your elders. Sit down with a tub of photographs. Write the names of people on the back of the photographs, because if you don't know who it is, that photograph is no longer usable to an archive. It is just a photograph of 1953 at some parade. Who's in the parade? I need to know. I need to know those things. Write on the back of your photographs, use a pencil, use an archival marker, but document your life, because once you're gone, or your grandmother's gone, or your grandfather's gone, once those elders are gone, those stories are gone, And if they never told you who's in that picture and you don't know who's in that picture, then that picture is just a beautiful decoration that you will find in some antique store. And it's so heartbreaking. Write down, document your family, document, get those oral histories. It's so, so important. And just, even if it's just for yourself and your family, like you can keep them for yourself. You don't need to give them to us, but know that they're out there. So anyway, that's my little
I think,
soapbox.
I think that's
Absolutely.
a great way to activate people in the audience if you have your own, family history or your own personal archives, I'm always fascinated by and saddened by the fact when I see photographs at thrift stores or in bins on the side of the street at estate sale, it's like, what, who's getting rid of their family history? But that's just the archivist memory worker in me. But this is a great segue into almost one of the last topics I wanted to touch on is sustainability in this work. Like we talk about working in archives is an ongoing process. Things are always changing in this stage of digital repositories and different types of formats. Like things are always changing and advancing at rapid speeds that we have to keep up with. And it's like thinking about all the collections that might be in a space, in an archive, in an institution, or in a small collection, like, and how you have to keep up with those types of materials in order to make them accessible to the public so the public can actually interact with these artifacts, right? So I wanted to talk about like sustainability, not only through the ways that you all are involved in your projects, what you're doing to make sure that the work you're doing can be passed on to the next generation, what your hopes are in, 7 generations from now, right? That's like a saying, like, what are we doing for now for the next 7 generations? Like, what are we building now to leave behind, and what tools are we leaving behind so they can continue doing this work? Because it's an ongoing process. So I don't know if anyone, and there's a lot of threats also to these efforts of preservation, and I think we'll touch on a few, but if anyone wants to talk about their sustainability practices and maybe any challenges that they're facing right now in their work?
Okay, real quick, I think personally for me, it's the way that I'm thinking about long-term sustainability and like 7 generations is building a strong foundation and framework that includes multiple voices, that includes multiple experiences, and that actively challenges the way that we're continuously told that we have to produce and work, because relationship building takes time. And so I think that's one of the things that we are continuously working to is like building that sustainability, because that invites other people to help us carry this forward. Because we can't carry it all by ourselves, no matter what it is. And people are always there they want to be activated. Like I feel like people love being involved in these ways because we all kind of get to explore our own our self-identity. And who knows, maybe we'll find our way towards like forgiveness and love. But anyway, sustainability for me looks like relationship building.
For us in the tribe, it's the next generation, it's future generations. It's really continuing to pass on our identity, our histories, encouraging people to reconnect, to look into your own family ties, connect to your people, not just ours, but like to all peoples of this area. The other thing too is, I can't speak too much on it right now because we're still in the planning stages, but the tribe is very much involved in starting a school. One of the first native schools here in Texas that primarily be working towards media literacy, which is what I do, sustainable, renewable energy, and agriculture, like low impact agriculture. And those are what we're working towards. I can't say a lot on it now because, like I said, we're still in the planning processes, but we're also very much involved in trying to connect our families, other clans' families throughout the Rio Grande Valley and South Texas, including Laredo, San Antonio area, and the Rio Grande Valley, the Delta.
Incredible, yeah.
So I've been interested in ethnic studies and Mexican American studies for a long time, and also it comes from my personal experience of learning about all these like writers and, you know, when by taking a class in college, I want to make this information more accessible. I'm an artist, but I've been really interested in like digging into history. And I think all of us can, you know, pursue that kind of journey into learning our own, whether it's South Texas history or Brownsville history or Laredo history or our own personal histories. But just as an artist, I'm trying to make this information more accessible, and through Nuestra Delta Mágica, I'm trying to make like an entry point for folks who want to learn, right, more. And so all the, pretty much nuestradeltamagica.com has a history section, and it's a good intro, and it has links, and it has a set of, I think, 10 or 13 books that we used for the references. And so we're also doing like small pop-ups. And so right now we're in the Brownsville Museum of Fine Arts. It's going to be there until the end of May, but the books that were used for the research are there. And so you can kind of like grab them and, you know, read through them. And of course, the website. And so if you want to start that journey, you can start there as an entry point. We also have images that I actually came here to look at the collections, and I still need to come because there's a lot. Yeah. But I took some photographs of, you know, that were included in the collection and put them in the website. So yeah, and also I'm also doing this project with another artist named Sandra Trevino, and it's called the Radical Library. And we're working on getting a small storefront in Brownsville, hopefully by the fall. And so, you know, books, banned books, critical studies books will be there. It will be a more curated kind of selection of, you know, social justice literature and content. But also Nuestra Delta Mágica will also be housed there. And it will include archival photos that we found through here or through the university, so that, you know, if folks can't come all the way over here, you know, or, you know, it hopefully provides more access to these materials. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So sustainability, I think there's a few different ways, I think, to look at it. But I think one thing that I've really tried to stress to people when I present on this topic or in the exhibit that I do is that we all have stories to tell. We all have stories that are worth preserving all around us, right? Like, this is not a history that is on Google, right? It's something that was put together by talking to people. There were people I met when I was younger who were some of the first queer people I ever saw, like living as themselves authentically, who even if at the moment I wasn't necessarily ready to do the same, I kind of stored it in my memory and was like, I'm gonna come back, and, you know, I wanted to go back and tell those people's stories because they were so influential to me. And then finding out how much more they involved in the community they were than I knew, right? So these histories are all around us. Like, I remember teachers of mine who were really visibly queer being able to go back and find them now as an adult through social media and asking if I could interview them, and then finding out how important they were to the community down here in ways I had never imagined. Being able to tell the story of someone I met when I was a kid who was a performing drag queen, and finding out that she was the first Black drag queen in the Valley to win a local pageant, right? And just thinking about how much she inspired me to think about a day where I could, you know, live as myself, right? Even if our experiences were very different. And so I think that there's so much power all around us. There's so many stories all around us. Anyone who's ever heard me present, I talk about my uncle a lot. He was a queer man who was murdered in the early 1990s, and all my life I heard, you know, there was a picture on my wall that my mom had put up of him, and it was the only picture I'd ever seen of him. And she said, you know, he was gay, and he was killed because he was gay, and that's the only story I ever heard about him. And when I started interviewing other people, other like queer and trans elders at the very beginning of this project, almost everybody had met him. And I found out that he was the first queer person to own a queer bar here in the Rio Grande Valley, that he helped foster the local drag scene, and a lot of the drag queens I'd grown up seeing had actually started because he'd given them their start. I found out he helped plan the first Pride celebration in the Rio Grande Valley. He was a part of planning that first Pride celebration. And so he had this whole community and this whole story that no one in my family knew about, because he'd kept that part of himself hidden. And so I think these stories they're all around us, and I don't want to sound alarmist, but they're also dying all around us. Yeah. And so it's really important to try to, as people die, they take these stories with them. And so I think it's really important to just document your family's history, document your own history. I think every queer and trans person who exists, or every person of a marginalized identity who exists, is a story of resistance, is a story of creativity, is a story of community, is a story of resilience, and is a story of survival. And I think that those stories are all worth telling. And we have so many more tools available to us now, I think, than our ancestors did, to tell our own stories, right? It doesn't have to be social media, but take advantage of the tools around you to document your own story, even if you don't necessarily feel it's worth telling right now, because it is worth telling. And then I think one last thing I'll say about that, I think sustainability looks like, putting the stories out in a way where they can't be erased again. And I think that, there's digital tools, there's social media, and there's other ways to keep these stories around in a more sustainable way, where they can't just get thrown out in a bin, right? Mm-hmm. Or they can't just get lost to a flood. And one of the things I think is really important about that is, so we have heard, the last few years about how trans children are this new phenomenon, right? And how it's just because kids are all on Twitter and Tumblr that now they all want to be trans, and that we didn't have trans kids when I was growing up. And so I've made it my mission to try to find as many photos as I can of trans and gender nonconforming children being themselves here in the Rio Grande Valley. And I've been able to find ones of trans kids going as far back as the 1960s. Wow. And 70s and 80s and 90s, and putting those out in a way where people don't have to have these arguments over and over again, because that's what happens when these stories are not preserved. We have to have the same argument over and over again. And that's what we're seeing right now in the debate around the existence of trans children, right? And so I think sustainability to me means preserving these stories in a way where the next generation can learn from them, but also empowering people to tell their own stories and to document the history that's happening all around them right now as we speak.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Really quick. I think, and just also thinking about documenting, especially present day with social media, right? Like maybe going that extra step of printing out the photographs or whatever you're seeing online, because personally, one of my missions is not only to work for collective narrative change, but also for the narrative that I live with in my head. Mm-hmm. Because I have a small 7-year-old, and it's my responsibility and duty to be able to make sure that we break the cycle. Because I want her to come to Brownsville and be, and it's cool because I already see it. She's like, can't wait to go to the beach. And I'm like, yes. And she's like really enamored because there's so much here. And there's different ways that we can do it. But going back, like, I think there is a lot of power in documenting your story, because it's like, no one can tell you who you are because I already know. Like, I know my family history, I know who I am, and I know where I come from. You don't. And so there's something very powerful in that, right? Where you can stand on your 2 feet and just kind of be able to continue to tell those oral histories, because they are forms of resistance and they are forms of cultural preservation and legacy, right? Like, how do we continue to shape this region, which is ever shifting, right? But there's still a very prominent culture and community and way of living that is just so unique than anywhere else. And so document, print out your stuff, scrapbook with your family, like bring back the stationery. But a friendly reminder.
Yeah, I think it's a form of valuing ourselves, right? Valuing where we come from, who we are, who's around us, who's in our circles, who's in our communities, our loved ones, our extended families, our chosen families, And I think at ENTRE, like what we are trying to do is through the archive, we're trying to involve the people from the community, like resisting against these structures that have been deemed, like not accessible to people in our communities to enter or contribute or to have say in how they're represented. That we're doing and that everyone's doing on this panel, I think we're all hoping to, provide some sort of agency and empowerment to the communities around us to find that value in themselves and to know that their stories are important and that they contribute to what the larger world sees of this region. And I think all of us on this panel are talking about shifting the narrative. And I think that's a really big thing that's happening right now in this region, in all sorts of efforts in social and artistic and creative, political structures. I think the shift of the narrative of this border region and how all border regions in the US, Mexico, Texas, Mexico area are not equal. We are not all one thing. We are very different communities. We have shared forms of resistance and shared forms of struggle and challenge, but I think it's important to highlight those nuances so that people know who we are, why we're here, what's happening here, and to be more informed, right? We're rounding out at almost 55 minutes. So I wanted to open up the floor to any questions from the audience, or if there's any questions from the live stream or comments that anyone has. Don't be shy. Okay, yeah, okay, we have a mic. Andres, would you mind grabbing? There we go.
Thank you.
Let's turn it on and. For those on the live stream, it's nice to have the mic so they can hear. So, there we go.
I am, thank you, by the way, and yes to all of that. I have my master's in history. I am also in theater. So I'm coming at this from a lot of different ways. I'm also a transplant to the Valley. And I've been joining these great communities like Beyond Borders Book Club that Thomas and Clarissa have started. There is, I just auditioned for a show at South Texas College where there's a Latinx playwriting competition, all these kind of things. And I'm just wondering, I've been thinking about the sustainability stuff that you guys have been talking about. And because of the oral nature, because of these other ways of archiving outside of the master's house, all of those things that you need to do to get these stories out there, is there any bigger plan to kind of combine a lot of these efforts into one? I use, McAllen just had a Comic-Con. I mean, is there something that's like a conference style that brings a lot of those? Yes, they just had a Comic-Con. But is there anything in the works to have kind of some of those things, because they're all working outside of these historically colonized, education is colonized, the historical field is colonized, all of these places, like, is there a space in the works? I know that's a really big question, but is there a space in the works to kind of get some of these things moving in the same direction together?
So I can speak on this just really quickly. It's not on, is it? It doesn't let me. Okay, we'll turn it off. Anyway, so, oh yeah. So we think, so there's something that's been on our radar for a while, and we've talked as a museum about doing, if you go to Austin has a archives bazaar where everyone kind of is connected together and they all talk about what they have and who has it, and we're trying to get something like that started to where trying to start it. We haven't started it yet, but it's one of those things that I think is really important because everybody has their own resources, everybody has their own thing, and like I said before, we can't hold everything, right? So, but I can tell, and a lot of times I do, when people come in, they're like, I need to do research on this. We don't have it, but have you called so-and-so, or have you called over here, or let me call someone and see if they'll lend you what they have, or they'll come in and talk to you. And I think that's really important, but that's also why I really push for, like, everyone needs to archive themselves so that we know that's out there, and then we can one day connect it all and have this beautiful web of archives. So yes.
I think that's a beautiful goal because I'm also a fan of the Archive Bazaar. I lived in Los Angeles for a while and worked in archives out there, moving image archives, and they had an Archive Bazaar every year at UCLA, and it was awesome. So seconding that, invite ENTRE, invite all these people to be a part of it. I think one of the things I wanted to touch on in that regard is the importance of relationships and partnerships between organizations like ourselves, like which we are, we're not a nonprofit, we're a worker-owned cooperative, we work very deeply with the community. But to have partnerships like the museum, like what we're doing today, and being able to bridge those networks is super important. And I think a lot of people, and like what Monica and everyone's been saying, it's like this is like relationship building, and it takes time to do that with these types of projects and the type of intention that we all want to give to them. But I really think what it is, I don't think there's anything right now like that bridges all of these, but it is an intentional thing that I think we're all trying to pursue in our efforts individually, is trying to connect one another with the resources that we need and see how we can help one another and sustain this into the future without having to carry it all ourselves, right?
I would like to challenge that because I think that we're already doing it.
Yeah,
You know,
it's
like in this
happening.
conversation, we are here and we're building those relationships, not just with one another, but with you as well, right? And the hope is to activate everyone in this room in a way that will either like say like, oh, this really cool project with La Salta Mágica, or these are some environmental efforts that Viestocna Carrizo Crudo is like leading. And so there's all these different interlaces where it's like, how do we raise visibility for all our projects? And here we are.
Here we are.
Yeah, and so like, you know, continuing, I think, just keep an eye out for programming. There will be, because these projects are nowhere near finished or complete. They are ongoing and going to live forever.
Yes. I think there's a question from the internet.
No, actually, it's a comment from me. Hello. Yeah, so before we move on to the next question, I was just going to say that there's actually a lot of stability in networks, right? They are much more resilient than kind of centralized kind of forms of organization. Yeah, so I feel like just echoing what you guys are saying, I think that, yeah, creating connections, networks, much more stable in terms of like longevity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah? We have a
Yay. Okay.
comment.
I think we have enough time for like maybe another question after this, and then we'll
I'm sorry,
transition.
this is going to be more of a comment than a question.
Oh, yeah, please.
In traditional academic fashion. I know many of you up there, and I'm just going to put my like academic hat on for a moment. Just I love everything that's happening up here, and have been able to see so many great projects being led by different people across the valley, and I love it. I also am a transplant. Surprise. But you know, finding all of these communities and all of these histories also helps me feel like this is a home too. So the work that you're doing is amazing. Turning to sustainability issues, right? There's a really big elephant over there, right behind us, a little bit to the west, right? That it both may have historically caused some of the issues that many of you talked about today, but also has the potential to be a good partner for these outcomes. There are new programs like public heritage and community engagement that's hoping to have students sort of develop these perspectives that y'all have come to through your experiences without necessarily having to leave. But it also means that there are students who are engaged and fired up and who want to participate, and there are mechanisms to get their assistance to you all. Yes. So just like, I know universities, education can be a problem, but also a potential solution. So just want to throw that in the mix.
Most definitely. I think being able to partner with the university and do these types of things, have these conversations and have students be involved. I know that a lot of y'all probably came out because of my incessant emails. And I did reach out to a lot of educators because this is important. And these are conversations that should be brought into the classroom and brought into our current educational structure. So yes, bring your students over. We'd love to connect with them and take us over there so we can talk to them.
Yeah. And if we have any educators of any grade levels, invite us. Yeah. Invite us to go talk. I mean, if there's one, we'll all go.
I went to, not to plug, but I went to talk to a GSA in Weslaco 2 weeks ago about this history, and just did like a short 45-minute kind of overview of the LGBTQ plus history of the region. And it was it was probably one of my favorite presentations I've ever done, because there are a lot of queer and trans kids who, like myself when I was growing up, felt like I was the first one or one of the first ones. And we get so severed from our history because it's not preserved that we don't know that we're part of this like rich legacy, and that there's a community out there waiting to embrace us when we're ready, and that we have a long history of surviving some of the things that these kids are having to survive right now, and that it's possible. And I just think, kids, especially those of you who are teachers of school-age children, there's a lot of power in bringing people in like us who can talk about these things in a way that's rooted in community.
We're all very approachable.
And we like to talk, obviously.
And I will also say, though, that the museum brings in
How dare she?
So the museum brings in interns every year, and I really feel like y'all can use some interns too. We love a good intern.
Yes.
Oh, do you? Oh, so am I emailing you instead of Dr. Graham? Okay. Okay. Yes. We'll talk afterwards. Okay. Oh, perfect. Okay. But yes, interns are always great, and I love bringing them in and showing them behind the scenes and how it actually works. Like, it's very Oz, and I take people back. I'm like, you want to see the back rooms? Because it's really incredible, and there's so much like sustainability. There's so much that goes into archiving one piece of paper. The amount of documentation that we make, because I never want to be the only person with knowledge about why we have this picture, why we have this arrowhead, why we have this telephone. So documentation is super duper important, and there's things that people don't think about until someone says, well, you know, this is why we do it. And so, yeah, we love an intern. Y'all need to use interns.
Yes.
No, for real.
Yes, we're looking for interns too. Are there any other questions? There's one. There's a lot. Yeah, okay.
So my question is basically around if, for the grassroots kind of archivist, if y'all's work has been, you know, asked for or been used either by academics or by larger institutions, say for display or for exhibition, kind of to include into the larger narrative by, like, say institutions like MOST or I don't know, the academy.
I think with ENTRE, we haven't. We have a very strict donor relationship with our. We make sure that our donors know what their photographs might be used for, and we always make sure to get permission and things like that when they are going to be on display, or if we're using them in any sort of literature. We've presented at a couple of conferences using some of the posters and stuff, but we've never like done a full exhibition of the work in a space. And we do want to do that type of work, and we would love to be invited to display some of the collections we've gathered for the archive. It just is a matter of intentionality and making sure that our donors are aware, and if they would like to be a part of it, we always try to include them as well. So I don't know, have you had any opportunities to show anything?
I've done, I have curated the exhibit every June through STEP and the Valley AIDS Council. I've had academics reach out to me and say that they've cited the work that is on the Instagram archive, or that they've cited work that they found in the exhibit. And I'm always just like, yeah, that's awesome, as long as you cite. And I think I'm also really sensitive to the donors' needs. So I always try to be really transparent with people about where their information is going to be shared and the limits of that, and where they feel comfortable with it being shared, and how they feel comfortable with their story being shared, what aspects of it they feel comfortable with it being shared. And so I'm always really mindful of that when other people ask for things. And I'm always down to collaborate with other institutions. I do feel like there's sometimes a relationship between more formal or academic archives or more formal academic institutions where they're like, oh, that's so cute that you're doing this, but like give it to us so we can do it for real. And it's like, no. I think one thing that's really important about the work that we're all doing is that it's very rooted in communities, not just communities that we're a part of because we exist, but like communities that we're actively engaged in. And so a lot of this work came out of when I first moved back to the Rio Grande Valley, I got really involved in different grassroots organizing that was being done to advocate for the queer and trans community. I think, you don't have to do that in order to get interested in documenting history or anything like that. But for me, it felt like this was an outgrowth of like some of what I was seeing and wanting to document the history of how we got to where we are now. But there's a lot of relationship building that goes into that. There's a lot of like forming genuine connections with people, building their trust, having multiple conversations with people before they're willing to let you even record them or even willing to show you pictures. And I think sometimes in academia, and there will be people who reach out and say like, hey, I want to write an article about queer and trans people in the Valley. Can you send me a list of people to call? Okay, thanks, bye. And it's just sort of like, that's sort of like fly by night community history isn't necessarily like something I want to invest in because I do think it should be rooted in the community and it should be like a community effort. But does that answer your question?
Do you have any other questions? I think we have one right here. The mic. Thank you. All right, and then we'll end after this.
No. And on a high note. Okay, so it sounds like one of the main things that I heard throughout y'all talking, which first of all, thank you all so much for all of this, was the concept of value. And one of the ways that colonizing works, one of the ways that power works is by telling us what to value, whether it's certain identities or the stories that we should value or the place itself, right? I think everybody in this room, Valley Native or not, you know, especially the Valley Natives, we have all been told at some point or another, no vale.
Yeah.
Like, no, this place sucks. Like, que vale, right? And we've been told not to value it. We've been told not to value ourselves. And it sounds like a lot of one of the biggest fights in my head going on right now is not necessarily the people in this room who kind of all align ourselves and we're all like, yes, we should document this. We are all valued, we matter. It's the other people who, you know, like my tios or my tias who are like, no, you know, who cares, right? I think that's the biggest fight right now in my head about how do we tell these people that their voices matter and that they value, or that they have value, because that's one of the biggest ways we can fight back against people wanting to take this place from us, right? There's nothing here. Oh, we're the first ones here, right? They call it mud or whatever. And really, there's so many stories here that will be lost. And I tell my students, I give them basically a mini existential crisis by going, if you never write anything down, did you ever exist at all?
Mic drop.
And then I continue with like, what is, you know, you exist right now because you've had people fight and survive and die and kill for you to be here right now. What are their stories? And they don't know. And I don't fault them for that. I don't think I know either. And so I think that's the biggest struggle is even just trying to convince people that they matter and that they have value. I guess this is an open question for everybody in the room, but as well as you guys. How do we share the idea, or how do we push people to believe that they have enough value to even share these ideas, right? Because there is a lot of power in just being who you are, or hearing the stories of your people, or just looking around at all the invisible stuff that's really hidden there. How do we do that?
So quick answer, let me get a mic. Quick answer would be, I have learned that going individually to people and asking them individually for their information, for their story or whatever has worked. I still get that, first I get that like, oh, well, yeah, like, just look, I just really need it. Can you just please give it to me? It's not gonna hurt you in any way. But a lot of times we are discounted. Even in my own family, when I try to get stories from my grandma's not interested in telling us her story. But then she'll like randomly come up with something and I'm like, hold on, start that over again. And I'm like, I didn't know you did that, or I didn't know you were with that, or whatever. So you kind of have to either go individually and ask someone, like, I really need this information, I heard you were a part of this, or get them drunk on coffee and pan dulce.
Yeah.
Just get the comadres together, get the
Sweeten them
comadres,
up.
and just let that story start coming out, and put your phone in the middle and just record it. Those are really the two ways that I've found work best. But yeah, people don't value their story. It's weird.
I think just to mention is that we have to meet people where they're at, you know? We are all on this journey of self-knowledge and self-acceptance, and whether you're conscious to it or not, I think it's really important to, you can only meet people as deeply as they've met themselves, right? So you can't force someone to believe that their memories are valid or important to history. It takes a lot of time. A lot of this work is relationship building, and a lot of it is compassion and being able to understand one another on just a basic human being level, right? So I think a lot of that is bridging those, and obviously there's boundaries, and there's times where you cannot engage. You know, if something's toxic or something's just not. It's just a lot on you and the situation. But I think it's important to have that flexibility and that fluidity in meeting people and just building that relationship slowly. And, you know, people are going to come to it at different points and different entryways. So for me, that's what I can contribute.
Just to add, I think taking this more into like the personal, right? Like, I don't know anything past my grandparents' name. I just know that they were Silveria and Melquiades, Hernandez Fernandez, but where they came from, where they lived, how they lived, nada. So in that, and I'll say me personally. I have a beautiful family, but it's also very beautifully complicated and nuanced, right? So we all have very similar values, but might have different politics or ways of living and all this stuff. And like similarly, how everyone has mentioned, right? Like just have that, like start those conversations little by little, right? But I also think it's like you have to also do that self-reflection of like, who am I? Where am I? What biases do I have? And how can I show up for this person to feel comfortable enough to talk to me about these things? And like, what language am I using to have this conversation with? Because I can't talk to my mom if anytime I enter a space, I think, okay, would my mom feel comfortable? And if the answer is no, then I have failed, right? And so it's one of those things where it has taken so long. But I think really it's just having that internal work, also like putting aside your biases and meeting people with a lot of compassion and empathy and allowing people to unravel as they need. Yes.
Kind of to add to that, with the work that I guess a lot of us are doing here in the Rio Grande Valley, we're resisting what is the extractive industry. And it's not just the physical industry itself taking resources and developing, but it's also like the approach, like that mindset, whereas like there's nothing here, like this place sucks. That's part of it, it's put onto us so they can come in here and take what they value, what their God is. And that's the power, yeah. That's the money over and the power over us. I think for within my people and people who have worked with us closely, who've been to the property in Floresville and done ceremony with us, I think intimacy is a real big thing in community. And it doesn't have to be like, oh, come do ceremony with me the way we do it. I mean, I'll come down here. I had a great time here last week, with the candidates that are running for Port Authority, and, living the way they do here in Brownsville. That genuine intimacy is what keeps us from continuing that extractive mindset. And like, we do academic work, like that's part of it. Like, but we have to step back for a second sometimes and say, am I being extractive? Like, am I exploiting this person? And that's why it's so important to have genuine intimacy with people. And I'm not talking about romance or love or anything like that, but like, I mean, yeah, okay. It is. I think of it as just being like human, us being human, because then we don't have to put a label on it, right? Like we are, again, in this together, and it's a collective work.
Yeah, thank you, Pablo, for saying that, the extractive part, because a few years ago or 3 years ago, I started documenting my mom's stories, and I think at first, because we've also been trained in academia, right, that some of these things it's not about being extractive, it's about building, and that takes time, just reiterating what everybody has said. But I mean, my mom's, those stories are also painful, and so it's really hard. It's a process that is hard because you're essentially asking, like I was essentially asking my mom to remember, right? But it's through conversation, through even building my relationship with her. And at first she was like, ya no me preguntes tantas cosas. and then now I don't ask her, but she'll be like, sí, me acuerdo que cuando vendíamos en Nuevo Laredo, like she'll tell me without me asking her, because she already knows I have an interest, a deep interest in her life and her story and her photos. And my mom like wore these really cool suits during the 70s, and I was like, yo quiero, sí, I'm like, yo quiero ese outfit.
Why didn't you save them?
And so, yeah, it's just, I'm like, yeah, your parents were like young at a time, right?
People too.
Yeah, and so it takes time. Yeah.
I think one last thing that this brings up, and I for some reason it's like stuck with me, right? And C and I were talking about this yesterday, but people of color are usually deprived from their histories and then scared of their memories. And so it's kind of like this boogeyman, right? Where like it's in the dark, you don't want to turn it on, but you're too scared to get on and turn on the light. But then as soon as you get up, you're like, oh, it's painful. Don't get me wrong. It takes a lot of time and ability to build that self up. But I think memory work, yes, is a lot of grief work, but grief is another form of love that just never had a place to go. And so you are kind of holding on to this love that creates so much pain because you just want to give it, and you want to miss it or like touch it or feel it or taste it, but it's not there. And so I think that memory work does have that ability to break through grief and open up the possibilities of healing, of growth, of connection, of resistance and protection, along with preservation, of course, right? Historical preservation, so we can have that ability to continue to build. Just wanted to add that.
I think one quick thing, and because everybody's responses to your question were so powerful, but I think one thing is, I think you already have the answer to your question, because you said, you talk to people about all the people who had to fight and die and suffer and survive and inspire and do all these things for them to be here. And I think it's been really interesting for me to do this work at the same time that I got really serious about doing genealogy and documenting my own family history, because I think there are a lot of parallels in the way that I, as like a queer and trans person, exist here today because of all of the community that came before me and the way in which they literally fought to create space where I could exist. I'm also the result of my biological ancestors, right? And sometimes those communities have overlapped, actually, but I'm the result of people who had to, and so I think before I had a vague awareness of my genealogy that I put together just like really quickly, but it was just a list of names. But actually going through archives and looking at documents and finding out that, I'm descended from people who were born into slavery, who survived the mission system, who were killed by the Texas Rangers, but they created my ancestor before they were killed. And knowing that I'm the result of all of that, I don't think I could ever think that story is not worth telling once you understand the depth of it. And I think that you answered your own question. I think it's a great question, but I think it's there. Just tell people, think about everything that had to exist before you for you to be here. And there's no way that your story is not valuable. There's no way that your story is not worth sharing and documenting and learning more about, if all of that had to happen for you to just exist. Yes. And I think you mentioned this, but having kids, my 2-year-old and my 1-year-old are here, but it really makes you think about what had to happen for them to exist. And thinking about the next generation, I think, if thinking about everything that came before you doesn't impress you, think about what's going to come after.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much.
Well,
Plant those seeds.
yes, plant the seeds. Well, we'll leave it at that. We can talk about this stuff forever, and we'd love to continue the conversation. We do have a lot of things on display around the space. I want to thank you all for joining me and ENTRE and his museum here in this conversation today. It's such a beautiful group of individuals and all these projects and initiatives that are happening here in the Rio Grande Valley. Obviously, we're doing the work down here, right? So it's really awesome to see it in action and be able to celebrate you all today for Preservation Week. Yes, and so we have coffee, we have pan dulce. Please help yourselves and ask questions in the different displays, and our panelists will be around. If you were a little too shy to approach on the mic, come to us and we'll talk about it. So thank you all for being here and have a great rest of your Sunday.